Paris, 1792. The streets outside the mansion hummed with noise, carts clattering, vendors shouting, and distant voices crying about freedom and justice. But inside the walls of Monsieur Duval's estate, no such cries were heard. For Amadou, the black slave who lived beneath the shadow of that house, life was silence, commands, and the bite of chains. He had been torn from Africa when he was a boy, dragged onto a ship with hundreds of others. The stink of sweat and death had clung to his skin even after years had passed. Now, at nearly 30, his body bore the scars of whips and iron shackles. But his spirit carried something deeper, the memory of a mother who used to sing as she braided his hair. The sound of waves breaking on his village's shore, those memories were his only refuge, though they often cut like glass. Reminding him of what could never return, every morning began the same way, Claude. The overseer would storm into the servants' quarters, whip coiled in hand. "Up, beast!" Claude barked, his voice sharp as broken glass. "The master wants the floors scrubbed before the guests arrive. Move, or I'll peel the skin off your back." Amadou rose without protest, his muscles aching from the day before. He knew better than to respond. Words only fed Claude's cruelty. The lash cracked across Isabelle's shoulder as she hesitated to stand, and her gasp filled the room. Amadou's jaw tightened, but he kept his head bowed. If he defied Claude, the punishment would be worse for both of them. Hours of labor followed. Amadou scrubbed until his knuckles bled, carrying buckets of water until his shoulders screamed. At dinner, he stood by the wall like a piece of furniture while Monsieur Duval dined with noble guests. Their powdered wigs and silk clothes glittered in the candlelight, while Amadou's bare feet ached against the stone floor. "Look at him," one guest sneered. "Wow," gesturing with his wine glass. "A fine creature, is he not? Strong shoulders." Like an ox, Duval chuckled, puffing on his pipe. "Indeed, I keep him in Paris to remind me of the colonies. A man must display wealth. You see, in what better way than this rare specimen?" Laughter filled the hall, echoing against marble walls. Amadou stared straight ahead, his face a mask of stone. Inside, shame and fury burned, but he buried it deep. Claude, watching from the corner, smirked knowingly. Later that night, when the guests had left and the candles guttered low, Amadou returned to the servants' quarters. Isabelle sat on her cot, nursing the welt on her shoulder where the whip had struck. Her eyes, though weary, carried a quiet strength. "They will not break us," she whispered, meeting his gaze. Amadou sat beside her, lowering his voice. "They already try every day." "Yes," Isabelle said, her lips trembling but steady. "But chains cannot hold the soul. I remember my mother's songs, as you do. They give me strength." For a moment, the cold stone room warmed with their shared memory. A fragile bond, but one that kept them alive. The next morning, the cruelty worsened. Claude ordered Amadou into the courtyard, forcing him to kneel before a group of visitors. "See here," Claude bragged, gripping Amadou's hair to tilt his face upward. "Even beasts can be tamed with a strong hand." The visitors laughed, tossing coins as if he were an exhibit at a carnival. Amadou's cheeks burned, humiliation cutting deeper than any lash. He clenched his fists, but he did not fight. To fight would mean death. To endure meant survival, and survival carried the faint. Dangerous hope that one day chains might fall. That night, as he lay on the hard cot, the noise of Paris filtered through the barred window. Shouts of liberty, rumors of the Bastille, chants of freedom, they seeped into his dreams. The irony twisted like a knife. Men marched for equality in the streets, yet here he lay, stripped of humanity, nameless except for the chains that marked him. Amadou closed his eyes and whispered silently to himself, "They will not take my soul. Not tonight. Not ever." And though the darkness pressed heavy, a small ember of defiance glowed inside him, hidden but alive. The summer air in Paris was heavy with smoke and voices. Even inside Monsieur Duval's mansion, Amadou could hear the rumble of unrest rolling through the city like distant thunder. At dawn, while scrubbing the marble steps, He caught fragments of angry chants from the streets beyond the iron gate. Liberté. Justice. No more kings. The words struck him like sparks, though he dared not show it. Claude patrolled the courtyard with his whip resting across his shoulder, his eyes darting nervously toward the noise outside. The overseer's swagger had shifted in recent weeks. Fear crept into his steps, though he tried to mask it with louder commands and sharper blows. "Scrub harder, dog," Claude barked, striking Amadou across the back when he paused to listen. "The streets may burn, but this house will shine. Do you hear me?" Amadou gritted his teeth, his back stinging, and bent lower over the brush. He had learned long ago that silence was the only shield he had. But in the silence, the voices outside echoed louder in his chest. Freedom. Justice. Equality. It's words he had never known in truth, but words that stirred a hunger inside him he could not quench. Inside the mansion, Sieur Duval ranted to his guests, pacing with a glass of wine in hand. "The rabble think they can tear apart centuries of order? It will not last. The king will crush them soon." His words were filled with wine-soaked bravado. But Amadou noticed his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. That evening, Isabelle found Amadou in the servants' quarters. She lowered her voice, her eyes darting toward the door. "They say the Bastille has fallen," she whispered. "The people tore it down, stone by stone." Amadou froze, the bucket slipping slightly from his grasp. The Bastille. He had heard of it. The fortress prison where enemies of the crown were kept. To hear that it had fallen was unthinkable. "What does it mean?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Isabelle's face carried both hope and fear. "It means the people are rising. Some say they fight for all who are oppressed." Her words lingered, filling Amadou with a dangerous yearning. Could this storm sweeping Paris truly break chains like his? Or would it sweep him away like debris in the street? Their conversation was cut short when Claude burst into the room, eyes burning with suspicion. "What are you whispering about?" he demanded. He stepped toward Isabelle, raising the whip. Amadou's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed for him to intervene, but he knew the price. He kept his gaze on the floor, fists clenched so tight his nails bit into his palms. Claude struck Isabelle across the face with the back of his hand. She staggered, but did not cry out. Her silence was defiance enough. That night, Amadou lay awake on his cot, his body sore from the day's labor. Through the barred window, the noise of Paris grew louder. Shouts of revolution, the crackle of fire, the pounding of drums. He closed his eyes and imagined those voices marching toward him, breaking open the gates, shattering the locks. But when he opened them again, the only reality was darkness, chains, and the steady drip of water from the ceiling. Days passed, and the tension inside the mansion grew unbearable. Duval drank more heavily, his face pale with worry. Claude's cruelty worsened, as if punishing the slaves could hold back the tide outside. Amadou was made to kneel in the dining hall again, this time forced to bow his head while Duval's guests jeered. "Look at him," one woman giggled, tossing a grape at Amadou's face. "Such obedient eyes. Does he even understand us?" Duval smirked. "He understands the lash. That is all these creatures require." The laughter stung worse than the grape. Amadou kept his face expressionless, but humiliation burned hot in his veins. He was paraded like a beast, mocked while the city outside roared for justice. When the guests left, Zobel pressed a damp cloth to Amadou's bruised cheek in the quiet of the servants' room. "One day," she whispered, her voice trembling, "they will pay for this." Amadou met her eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to speak what had long lived in silence. One day, he echoed, that night he dreamed of fire. He dreamed of chains snapping, of whips broken in two, of crowds not laughing but cheering as shackles fell from his wrists. But when dawn came, he awoke to the crack of Claude's whip against the stone floor, and the dream dissolved into the cold gray morning. Still, something inside him had shifted. The cries of liberty in the streets had found their way into his heart. He could not forget them, no matter how sharp the whip or cruel the laughter. And as he bent once more to his endless labor, a thought took root in his mind. Perhaps the fire in Paris would one day reach him too. Paris was no longer the same city Amadou had first seen when dragged here years ago. The air itself seemed charged, as if lightning crackled in every alleyway. Crowds gathered daily in the squares, voices hoarse from shouting against the king. The smell of smoke lingered where fires had burned through the night. Everywhere there were whispers, nobles fleeing, soldiers deserting, prisons stormed. From the mansion's windows, Amadou saw the chaos with eyes hungry for meaning. He was sent to haul barrels of water or carry crates, all while Claude watched like a hawk, whip dangling lazily in his hand. But in those rare moments when Claude's back turned, Amadou listened. He caught the servants muttering, overheard merchants arguing at the gates, and pieced together fragments of a storm growing larger by the day. "They'll bring down the monarchy itself," one servant whispered. "They say no man should live in chains," said another, though she quickly hushed herself when Claude's shadow passed by. No man should live in chains. The words clung to Amadou's mind long after they were spoken. That evening, while scrubbing pots in the dim kitchen, Isabelle leaned closer, her hands raw from work. "There are meetings in the streets," she murmured. "The people speak of liberty for all." Her eyes glimmered with a fragile hope, but fear clouded them too. "But Amadou," she added quickly, "do not let it deceive you. These people fight for themselves, not for us. They hate the masters, yes, but when they look at us—" She hesitated, her voice breaking. "They see only shadows, not men or women." Amadou listened in silence, his chest tight. He wanted to argue, to believe that freedom once unleashed could not be chained again. Yet Isabelle's words gnawed at him. He had seen the stares in the marketplace, the whispers of savage and beast. If the world was burning, would anyone care enough to pull him from the fire? That night, Claude's paranoia boiled over. He stormed into the quarters, whip snapping against the floor. "You think I don't hear you whispering?" he snarled. "You think I don't see the way you linger at the windows?" His gaze landed on Amadou, sharp as a blade. "If I catch you listening to talk of freedom, I'll carve the word into your back myself." The lash struck without warning. Pain exploded across Amadou's shoulders, tearing skin already scarred. He bit down on his lip, refusing to cry out. Blow after blow rained down, until his breath came ragged and his shirt clung wet to his skin. Claude spat at his feet. "Remember your place." When the overseer finally left, Isabelle knelt beside Amadou, tears streaking her face as she tried to clean the wounds with a rag. He shook his head, jaw tight. "Do not waste tears on me," he whispered. "They will kill you," she said, voice trembling. "You must not provoke him." Amadou's eyes burned, but not with tears, with something sharper. "They cannot kill what I keep inside," he said softly. "Not Claude. Not Duval, not the king himself." For a moment, Isabelle's breath caught. She saw the fire in him and feared it, yet also drew strength from it. The following days blurred into torment. Amadou's wounds barely healed before more work was piled on him. Yet through the haze of pain, his resolve deepened. He began to test the edges of danger, carrying water past the gates more slowly, lingering just long enough to overhear the chants of the people. One afternoon, while delivering supplies to the stables, he slipped a fragment of overheard gossip to a young stable hand, known to sympathize with the revolutionaries. "The master meets with nobles tonight," Amadou muttered quickly, eyes downcast. "They speak of fleeing the city." The stable hand's eyes widened, but he only gave a curt nod. No words of thanks, no acknowledgement of risk, just a silent agreement that the information would spread. It was a small act, but for Amadou, it was everything. For once he had not only endured, he had struck back, however quietly that night. His body ached with every movement, but his heart beat with a new rhythm. In the stillness of the quarters he whispered to Isabelle, "I will not wait for freedom to find me. I will reach for it myself." She stared at him, torn between fear and admiration. "Then you must be ready to pay the price," she said. Amadou lay back on his cot, the echoes of revolution rumbling through the walls like a distant storm. He closed his eyes and breathed deep, tasting both blood and hope on his tongue. The whip could cut his skin. The master could mock his soul. But in the darkness, The whisper of rebellion had taken root inside him, and whispers, he knew, could grow into thunder. He knew, could grow into thunder. The mansion no longer echoed with the laughter of nobles. Where once Monsieur Duval's dining hall had brimmed with clinking glasses and powdered wigs, now it stood quieter, shadows thick around the edges. The revolution had turned Paris into a firestorm, and the rich lived in fear of being consumed by it. But for Amadou and Isabelle, fear was nothing new. Their chains had been forged long before the streets ran red. Duval had grown meaner with his anxieties. He paced the halls at night, muttering about mobs and executions, his face pale with sleeplessness. By day he lashed out at his slaves with cutting words and cruel punishments, as though each blow could restore his slipping sense of power. Claude, eager to feed his master's fears, doubled his cruelty. Every mistake was treated as treachery. Every hesitation met with the lashed out one morning. As Isabelle carried a tray into the dining hall, her hands shook from exhaustion. A single goblet toppled, spilling wine across the polished table. The room froze. Claude was upon her instantly. He yanked her to her knees, striking her so hard the tray clattered to the floor. "Clumsy whore!" He spat, raising his whip. Amadou stood nearby, polishing silver. His muscles locked as he watched the leather curl through the air. The sound of it striking Isabelle's back tore through him like a blade. Her cry was muffled, but her eyes squeezed shut with pain. Amadou's knuckles whitened around the silver he held. For one dizzying moment, he nearly hurled it at Claude's head. His blood pounded with rage. But then Duval's mocking voice cut through the haze. "Careful, Claude," the master drawled. "Don't break her completely. They're no good to me if they can't stand." Laughter from the guests cruel, sharp, echoing in Amadou's skull. The silver slipped from his hand. He bowed his head, forcing his fury back into the pit of his stomach. To resist now would mean death, and Isabelle would bear the punishment alongside him. He swallowed the fire and bent once more to his work, though inside he burned hotter than ever. Later, in the dark of the servants' quarters, Isabelle winced as she lay on her cot, her back raw with welts. Amadou sat beside her, eyes heavy with shame and anger. "I should have stopped him," he muttered. She shook her head weakly. "No, if you had, he would have killed you. You must endure, Amadou. You must live." Her words stung, not because they were false, but because they were true. He had learned to live in silence, to let his dignity bleed out in small cuts, all for survival. But survival was beginning to feel like another kind of death. It was then that he made his decision. He would not only endure, he would resist, quietly, carefully. If freedom would not come to him, he would help carve its path. Even if his role was invisible in the shadows that night. While Duval met with fellow nobles in hushed, trembling tones, Amadou lingered by the doorway with a pitcher. His ears caught their whispers, plans to flee Paris, to bribe soldiers, to hide their wealth. Later, as he carried the empty pitcher out, he found a chance to pass this knowledge to the same stable hand he had spoken to before. A nod, a muttered phrase, nothing more. Yet in that small act, Amadou felt something stir within him, a piece of himself no lash could reach. The days blurred into weeks. The revolution outside swelling with fury. Amadou witnessed crowds marching past the mansion, their chants filling the sky. Death to tyrants. Liberty or death. Each cry seeped into his bones, feeding the ember that Isabelle's survival had kept alive. Claude grew more desperate. He dragged Amadou to the courtyard one evening, forcing him to kneel before the other slaves. "Look!" he shouted, striking Amadou across the face. "This is what happens when you forget your place." Blood dripped from Amadou's split lip. He looked up, meeting the eyes of the others. Not with defeat, but with quiet defiance. He would not beg. He would not cry. He would endure. And in that silence, stronger than any words, the overseer's triumph faltered. Claude struck him again, but Amadou did not break. Later, Isabelle whispered to him in the dark, "You are stronger than all of them." He shook his head. "No, I am only a man who refuses to bow." The revolution raged outside, louder each day, and Amadou knew the storm would soon reach their gates. He did not know whether it would bring freedom or death, but he no longer feared either. Broken, yes. Scarred? Yes, but unbowed. Always unbowed, the night Paris came to the gates of Monsieur Duval's mansion, the air itself seemed alive with fury. Amadou was hauling water in the courtyard when the first shouts reached his ears. Torches flickered beyond the iron gates, their glow spilling over the cobblestones like fire creeping closer. Claude stormed out, sword in hand, sweat dripping from his brow. "Inside, all of you!" he barked, shoving the slaves toward the kitchens. But Amadou lingered, gripping his bucket tight as the voices outside grew louder. Down with the tyrants. Justice. Liberty. No more masters. The gates rattled under the force of fists and poles. Then, with a splintering crash, they gave way. The mob poured in, ragged men and women, their faces lit with rage. They surged forward, overturning barrels, smashing windows, dragging guards to the ground. Fire leaped to the tapestries as torches met cloth. The mansion, once untouchable, shuddered under the weight of vengeance. Duval stumbled into the courtyard in his nightclothes, his powdered wig askew. "This is my property," he shouted, his voice trembling. "I am a man of wealth, of status." "You cannot." His words were swallowed by the roar of the crowd. Rough hands seized him, dragging him down into the dust where he had once forced others to kneel. For the first time, Amadou saw fear strip away the master's pride. Claude lunged at the mob with his sword, slashing wildly. "Back, dogs!" he screamed, blade glinting in the firelight. His eyes darted to Amadou. "You help me. Strike them down." Amadou froze, heart pounding. For years this man's voice had been law, his whip an iron leash. But now, with flames rising and the people screaming for blood, Claude's command sounded small, weak. When Claude turned his back to fend off another attacker, Amadou acted. He swung the heavy bucket with all his strength, striking the overseer across the skull. Claude staggered, cursing, blood streaming down his face. The mob closed in. Hands dragged Claude to the ground, boots striking his ribs, fists pounding his flesh. His screams dissolved into the chaos until they were gone altogether. For a moment, Amadou stood frozen, the bucket slipping from his grasp. He had struck back. After years of chains, of humiliation, of silence, he had struck back. His breath came ragged, his body trembling, but inside him burned something fierce. Amadou. Isabelle's voice cut through the din. She clutched his arm, her eyes wide with fear and awe. Around them, the mansion crumbled into chaos, flames licking the walls. Nobles' portraits torn and trampled, the crowd dragged Duval across the courtyard, jeering and spitting. "To the square?" they shouted. "The guillotine waits." Amadou and Isabelle watched as the master who had owned them, who had mocked their humanity, was carried away by the tide of justice. His cries for mercy were drowned beneath the chants of liberty or death. The slaves huddled together, uncertain. Some wept, others simply stared, too stunned to move. For them, freedom was a word too dangerous to grasp, too fragile to believe. Isabelle pressed closer to Amadou. "This is our chance," she whispered. "We must leave while the fire hides us." Amadou hesitated, his eyes locked on the burning mansion. Every scar on his back, every humiliation endured. Every lash and insult seemed to feed the flames until the house of his suffering collapsed in on itself. Smoke stung his eyes, but he did not look away. Finally he turned to Isabelle, gripping her hand. "Yes," he said, voice steady despite the chaos. "We will not wait for chains to be fastened again." They slipped through the shadows as the mob dragged their master to his doom. Behind them, fire devoured the mansion, the crackle of wood and roar of flames rising higher than Claude's whip had ever reached. For the first time, Amadou felt the weight of his chains ease. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. A taste of vengeance, sharp and bitter, clung to his tongue. As they hurried into the darkened streets, Isabelle whispered, "Do you think they will let us live free?" Amadou did not answer at once. He looked at the fire blazing behind them. at the crowd that cheered for liberty while blind to the chains still shackled on his wrists. "Tonight," he said finally, his voice like iron, "we live free in our hearts. Tomorrow, we will see if the world allows it." And with that, they disappeared into the streets of Paris, the flames of vengeance lighting their path. The flames of vengeance lighting their path. The streets of Paris stank of smoke and sweat. Bells rang wildly through the night as crowds surged toward the public square, chanting songs of liberty. Amadou and Isabel clung to the shadows, their bodies tense, their bare feet bruised by the stones. They followed the mob at a distance, drawn not by loyalty but by something darker, the need to witness. When they reached the Place de la Revolution, the air was thick with torchlight and shouting. The guillotine loomed in the center, its blade glistening red in the Free-Lichty. Monsieur Duval was dragged onto the platform. His powdered wig had fallen away, his once fine clothes torn to rags. He begged the tribunal, voice hoarse with terror. "I am a man of honor. I have served France faithfully." But the words only drew gears. The executioner forced him down. The crowd erupted in song. La Marseillaise thundered from 100 throats as the blade dropped. A flash of steel, a thud, and silence, then a cheer that shook the square. Heads on pikes were lifted high. Isabel buried her face into Amadou's chest, shuddering. He held her tightly, but his eyes never left the stage. He thought of the countless blows, the orders barked in that master's cold voice. He thought of the way Duval had laughed when whipping him. And now that voice was silenced forever. But even as the crowd chanted Liberté, Eagle-Light, Fraternit, Amadou's chains still weighed on him. His wrists were raw from iron cuffs, his back a map of scars. He felt no brotherhood from the men who waved Duval's severed head, no equality in their chants. They would cheer for freedom, yes, but not for his. "Amadou," Isabel whispered, her voice trembling, "we should leave. The crowd, they may turn on us." She was right. Already, some eyes lingered on them. Black skin in a sea of pale faces. Tattered slaves' clothes amidst the tricolor sashes of patriots. Freedom for the French did not mean freedom for them. They slipped away through the alleys, the echo of cheering behind them. Paris itself seemed to tremble with change. Nobles dragged into the streets. Soldiers switching sides, the rich hiding behind shuttered windows. But for Amadou and Isabel, nothing had changed. By dawn, they found themselves huddled in a narrow cellar, offered by an old woman named Mariette. She had once been a servant, and her lined face carried the same weariness Amadou saw in his fellow slaves. "You'll be safe here," she whispered. "For a time, but don't trust the revolution. Their liberty is not ours." Mariette fed them stale bread and thin soup. Isabel ate slowly, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. Amadou, though hungry, barely touched his food. His body ached, but his mind burned hotter than his scars. He thought of home, the land across the sea he barely remembered. The mother's face blurred by time, the freedom stolen before he even understood the word. And now here in a city that shouted freedom from the rooftops, he remained less than a man. That evening, Mariette led them through the streets, disguised as beggars. "Keep your heads down," she warned. "Revolution is dangerous for those who do not belong." They passed posters plastered on walls. "Liberty for all Frenchmen." The words stung. For all Frenchmen, but not for the men and women stolen from Africa. Not for Amadou. Not for Isabel. In the square, another crowd gathered to watch a line of aristocrats march to the guillotine. Among them were servants and attendants, anyone accused of loyalty to the old order. A boy no older than 15 wept as the crowd spat on him. Amadou's stomach twisted. "They cheer today," he muttered to Isabel. "But tomorrow, they will cheer for our deaths too." Isabel clutched his hand. "Then we must run, Amadou." "To the docks? To the sea? Anywhere but here." But even as she spoke, soldiers marched past, hauling chains of prisoners. Among them were black men, sailors, porters, slaves. Their eyes met Amadou's. Heavy with the same knowledge, the revolution's promise was not theirs to claim. That night, Amadou, lay awake on the cellar's cold floor. He could hear the distant roar of another execution, another cheer. He closed his eyes, but all he saw was the blade, falling again and again, not only on Duval, but on anyone the mob chose next. He turned to Isabel, whispering into the darkness. What if freedom is only a word? A word they use while the chains change hands? She reached for his face, her fingers gentle against his scars. Then we must make freedom ours, Amadou. Not their freedom. Ours. Her words cut deeper than the whip ever had. For years he had endured, bent but unbroken. Now, with the city in flames, he felt a spark of something more, not hope exactly, but defiance. As the bells tolled another dawn of revolution, Amadou rose to his feet. He would no longer wait for liberty to be granted. If freedom would not come to him, he would seize it with his own hands. And somewhere in the heart of Paris, under the shadow of the guillotine, his resolve hardened. If the revolution would not remember him, then he would force it to. Paris reeked of blood and smoke. Each morning brought new executions, new names scribbled onto the parchment of death. The guillotine no longer shocked the people. It had become their clock. At dawn, prisoners were led to the scaffold. By noon, the blade fell. By dusk, the square was scrubbed of blood. Ready for the next day, Amadou and Isabel moved like shadows through this city of fire. Mariette's cellar could not protect them forever. Food was scarce. Neighbors whispered. A black man and woman were too visible, too foreign. Their every step a reminder of what the revolution pretended not to see. One evening, while searching for scraps near the market, Amadou heard the shouts before he saw the soldiers. A group of captured runaways was paraded through the streets, chained at the neck. Some were African-born, their tongues heavy with foreign words. Others were children of slaves, their French fluent, yet their skin sealing their fate. The crowd jeered at them as though they were beasts, spies. Some shouted, "Aristocrats, servants." Others cried. To the mob, it did not matter. Their skin was guilt enough. Amadou's chest tightened as he watched them dragged toward the tribunal. He pulled Isabel away before the soldiers could notice them. But the image burned into him. Black men and women condemned not for treason, but for existing. That night, Mariette whispered news that turned his blood to ice. The tribunal, she said, voice shaking, has begun accusing foreigners of conspiracy. They say outsiders plot against the revolution. Already, sailors and servants have been taken. Isabel's hand found his in the darkness. We must leave Amadou before it is too late, but leaving was not simple. The docks swarmed with soldiers, ships searched, papers demanded. They had no documents, no names that mattered, no place to hide. The city that had once been their cage now felt like a hunting ground. Days passed in fear. Amadou scavenged bread crusts. Isabel stitched scraps into cloaks to disguise them. Still, whispers followed. Neighbors glanced too long. Children pointed. Every time Amadou crossed the street, he felt eyes judging, weighing, condemning one evening. Soldiers banged on Mariette's door. By order of the Committee of Public Safety, they barked. Mariette trembled as she opened the door, her wrinkled hands clutching her shawl. They searched the house, overturning stools, scattering belongings. Amadou and Isabel crouched behind a false wall in the cellar, hearts pounding so loudly they feared it would give them away. Boots thundered above them. Shouts rattled the air. When the soldiers left, Mariette collapsed to her knees, sobbing. They will come again, she whispered. And next time, they will not leave without you. Amadou knelt beside her, shame burning his chest. Their presence had put this old woman in danger. Isabel touched his arm, her eyes saying what her lips could not. We cannot stay. The next day, they fled Mariette's cellar. With no shelter, they wandered the alleys at night, hiding in abandoned buildings, huddling for warmth. Hunger gnawed at them, but fear gnawed harder. It was not long before the inevitable came. A patrol caught them near the river. Soldiers surrounded them, torches casting long shadows. Papers, the captain demanded. Amadou said nothing. He had no papers, no name the Republic would recognize. Isabel tried to speak, her voice breaking, but the soldiers laughed. Runaways, one sneered. Property of aristocrats, no doubt. Enemies of the people. They were chained at the wrists and marched through the streets. The crowd followed, jeering, hurling stones. To the guillotine, they cried. Amadou's head throbbed with humiliation. Once Dival had paraded him before guests as a spectacle, a beast dressed in rags. Now the revolution did the same. Chains clinked with each step, his back still burning from the memory of the whip. Nothing had changed. Nothing. Isabel stumbled beside him, her face streaked with tears. He turned to her, forcing his voice steady. "Do not bow your head," he whispered. "We are not animals." That night, they were thrown into a prison cell, thick with the stench of sweat and rot. Dozens of prisoners crowded the stone room, nobles in torn silk, beggars accused of theft, and in one corner, black men and women like themselves. A tall man with chains on his ankles looked up as Amado entered. His face was carved with sorrow, but his eyes burned with a fire Amadou recognized. "Another one," the man murmured. Another who believed the word liberty meant them too. Amadou sank against the wall, the weight of his body heavier than the iron on his wrists. Around him, the prisoners whispered prayers, curses, and final words. The guillotine shadow stretched over all of them. That night, sleep would not come. Amadou stared at the barred window, the moonlight cutting across the filthy floor. He thought of the blade falling, the roar of the crowd, the silence after. He thought of Isabel's hand clutching his, trembling but unbroken. The revolution had promised freedom. Instead, it had delivered him back into chains only now. The blade of the guillotine awaited. But even in the darkest hours, a single truth burned in his chest. He would not face that blade as a broken man. He would walk to it with his head high, his spirit unbent. For though the world had stolen his liberty, it could never steal his defiance. And in that defiance, he found the strength to endure the shadows of the guillotine. The dawn crept slowly into the prison cell, spilling pale light through the barred window. The prisoners stirred, their hollow eyes searching the shadows, waiting for the inevitable. For days, the guillotine had claimed them in groups 10 at a time, 20, sometimes more. Every sunrise meant fewer voices in the dark. Amadou sat with his back against the damp wall. Isabel pressed close beside him. Her head rested against his shoulder, her breath shallow, as though speaking too loud might summon the guards. He had not slept. Sleep was no refuge now, only the ticking of time before the blade. The cell door creaked open. Boots thundered on stone. "Names," barked the jailer. One by one, prisoners stood when called. Each name sealed like a coffin lid. At last, the jailer's voice echoed, "Amidou Isabel." Isabel's fingers dug into his arm. Her lips trembled, but she did not cry. Amadou rose, chains clinking. He lifted her gently to her feet. "Walk with me," he whispered. "We will not bow." The prisoners were herded into the courtyard. Morning mist clung to the air, softening the edges of the guillotine that loomed ahead. Its blade gleamed wet in the rising sun. The scaffold stained dark with blood too fresh to dry. The crowd was already gathering. Men and women waved tricolor flags, their faces flushed with fervor. They cheered as though attending a festival, not a slaughter. "Liberty, equality," they shouted. "Death to tyrants." But Amadou heard another cry beneath their words, a truth carved into his skin long ago. Freedom for them, chains for us. As he and Isabel climbed the wooden steps, the world seemed to slow. He remembered the fields of Dival's estate, the whip cracking across his back, the overseer's laughter. He remembered nights of hunger, of silence, of chains biting his flesh. And yet he also remembered the first time Isabel smiled at him, when hope was a dangerous secret they dared to share. He remembered the night the mob tore down the gates, the fire rising like vengeance from the heavens. He remembered striking Claude with the bucket, the sound of iron against bone. For one heartbeat, he had felt free now. As the blade loomed above him, that heartbeat was all he carried. The executioner barked orders. Amadou was forced forward first. Isabel's cry broke the morning silence. "No, take me first." The guard shoved her back. "Quiet, girl," one hissed. Amadou turned, meeting her eyes. "Isabel," he said softly, his voice steady, "do not fear. They cannot kill what is inside us." The executioner pressed him down, his neck against the cold wood. The smell of iron filled his nostrils, blood, sweat, fear. The crowd leaned forward, eager, hungry, and then a voice rose above the chants. "Why him?" The words cut through the square. A man stepped forward, his revolutionary sash tight around his chest. "Why does this foreigner stand here? He is no aristocrat. He is no traitor," the crowd murmured. The executioner hesitated. The man's voice grew stronger. "They cry liberty for all men, and yet you kill one who has never known liberty. Is this your justice?" A ripple spread through the people. Some jeered, shouting to the blade with him. Others frowned, uneasy. Amadou lifted his head, forcing himself upright against the executioner's grip. His voice, hoarse but fierce, rang across the square. "You shout liberty," he said. "Ow!" "Each word like fire, but you mean liberty only for yourselves. I was stolen from my home, chained, beaten, starved. I worked these fields while you feasted. I bled so your masters could live in gold. And now you cheer for freedom, yet still you see me as less than a man." The crowd stilled. Some spat in disgust. Others lowered their eyes. Isabel, tears streaming, whispered to Amadou. He continued, his voice stronger, rising above the murmurs. "You cannot silence me. You cannot erase me. My blood will stain this earth, but it will cry out louder than your blade. And one day, the world will hear it. One day, no master, no whip, no guillotine will bind us." The executioner growled, shoving him down again. But in that moment, Amadou felt lighter. His chains still clung to his wrists, but in his heart they shattered. The blade rose. Isabel screamed his name, her voice breaking against the sky. The crowd roared. Steel flashed silence, then the cheer erupted, deafening, swallowing the square. The blade had done its work. Amadou's body lay still, but his words lingered. Carried like smoke in the morning air, Isabel was dragged forward next. She trembled, her eyes wide with grief. But she remembered his voice, the defiance burning in his last words. She straightened her back. "I will not bow," she whispered. The blade fell again. By noon, the square was empty, scrubbed clean as though nothing had happened. The crowd dispersed, chasing new spectacles, new blood. The guillotine loomed silent, its blade glistening in the sunlight. But in the shadows, Mariette lingered. She had come to see, though she dared not speak. She bent to the ground where Amadou's blood had spilled, touching the earth with trembling fingers. "They will forget you," she whispered, "but I will not. And one day the world will remember." She carried a drop of that blood on her fingertips, pressing it into the folds of her shawl. A small act, a fragile defiance, but one that meant his spirit would not vanish with the crowd's cheer. The revolution would march on, devouring noble and peasant alike. The guillotine would rise and fall until even its builders trembled before it. But beneath its shadow, Amadou's last words echoed, refusing to die, for though his body was gone, his defiance had outlived the blade. And in that defiance, a seed of true liberty had been planted, one that no guillotine could ever sever, one that no guillotine could ever sever.